Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's my clock on my computer, at any rate, says that it's 2 o'clock. So I think we'll make a start. Welcome members, welcome officers, and welcome to any members of the public who might be listening in. I'll invite officers and report authors to introduce themselves in a moment, but there's just a few matters of etiquette and housekeeping to go through first. So this is our first virtual meeting of COCO. For those listening in, that stands for Community and Corporate Organisation Policy and Scrutiny Panel. It's our first virtual meeting, and they're held under the Virtual Meetings Regulations. So we're using Microsoft Teams for this. And the proceedings will have exactly the same standing and validity as if they'd taken place a physical meeting in the town hall. So we're streaming today's meeting live on the internet. The YouTube link for the meeting was published with the agenda. A recorded version will be available to view on the North Somerset Council website and on our YouTube channel, in fact, within 48 hours. Usually much quicker than that, to be honest. In terms of housekeeping, I prefer councillors, please, to the meeting etiquette, which has all been emailed to us previously. Please remember to use your headphones, as this will improve the sound quality for everyone, and switch off or mute any mobile phones. So if you think there's anything in the room where you're sitting that might activate for the next hour or two, please put those on silent or turn them off. Please ensure that your audio is muted when you're not speaking, and when you've spoken, please remember to mute your sound again. For any councillors joining by telephone, I think we've got at least one. You can also mute and unmute yourself if you've got a smartphone by pressing *6. I think that works for a landline as well. So please ensure you're in a quiet environment. So otherwise, everything will be picked up, including when you breathe. When you speak, would you please indicate by using the chat function if you wish to speak? That will be picked up by either myself or Philippa Penny. To avoid confusion, please refrain from using the raise hand function. I know that sometimes there's no alternative for people, but if we try not to do that and try to use the chat function for flagging when you might want to speak to an item, that I'll be very grateful. Please do refrain from asking any questions or interrupting the person who might be presenting the report, and perhaps wait to the end of that presentation before asking your questions. That's important, I think, to keep the flow. I will invite each of you to speak by way of a queue system using the chat functions, as I mentioned. When you speak, if you remember, please could you remember to introduce yourself, let people know who might be watching live or a future date, so they can put a name to a face. That would be appreciated. Would all non-panel members who might be listening in please ensure that your audio and video feeds are also turned off unless you're invited to speak. It's important, I think, for members of the panel, if you can keep your videos on at all times, that will help, I think, the members of the public identify who we are, and not be reduced to a couple of initials at the bottom of the screen. So please keep your videos on, please, members. Are there any questions so far from members about that process? We're beginning to get used to it, aren't we? Before I invite Philippa to take a roll call, this is our first, as I said, a first COCO meeting since early March, just before we went into lockdown. Having said that, there's been an awful lot that's been going on behind the scenes. Lots of conversations about all the challenges and some of the opportunities actually that the pandemic has that we're facing. I attended one of the coronavirus briefings in Town Hall, co-chaired that session in May, I think it was, with Chief Executive Joe Walker. I think it was we did that because I think we wanted people to recognise that as we transition from the sort of the medical emergency phase of this to a recovery phase, we wanted to stress the importance that scrutiny will have in that process. And we will address, I think, some of those issues much later in the meeting when we look at the work plan of this panel. Philippa, can I invite you to take a member's roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. If I call out each name in turn, if you could just confirm that you are present. So, Councillor Steve Bridger.
Present.
Jill Booth. Thank you. John Cato.
Present.
James Clayton. I'll come back to James Clayton. Peter Crewe.
On the phone.
Thank you. Mark Crosby.
I believe so.
Thank you. And I've received apologies from Wendy Griggs. John Leigh Morgan.
Present.
Stuart McQuillan.
Present.
Thank you. Robert Payne. Terry Porter. And Stuart. Oh, Councillor Porter. I can see him. And
we can see Councillor Porter.
yes, and Stuart Treadaway.
Yeah, I think Councillor Porter was having issues with sound because I'm pretty sure I saw him mouth present.
Okay. Thank you. Just returning to Councillor James Clayton. Lovely. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Philippa. We were already getting some feedback there. I'm not sure if that was from the dial-in. Not sure. We'll see how it goes. Okay, pressing on. Agenda item 1, addresses by members of the public. I believe there are none that have been received.
Yes, we have none, Chairman.
Okay, but well, as I say, welcome to members of the public who might be watching this live or in the future on YouTube. Item 2, apologies for absence.
Yes,
Griggs.
just from Councillor Griggs.
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Wendy Griggs. Item 3, declaration of disclosable pecuniary interests. Are there any members? Shaking of heads. I don't think there are. I'll press on. Minutes of the last meeting. We have these. You have those on your iPads, and I think pages 4 to 11 of the combined PDF document that was circulated with the invitation. You need to approve those minutes as a correct record. The 3rd of March 2020. I don't have any points to raise from those minutes. Any points that members wish to raise? I don't think so. Take that as a no. I move that we approve. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mark. Seconded by Councillor Crosby. Are we okay with that, Philippa?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, members. Item 5, matters referred by the Council, the Executive, other committees or panels. Again, I think there's nothing that's coming to us today. Can you confirm that, please, Philippa?
Yes, confirming, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the substantive agenda. Item 6, review of public space protection orders. The officer presenting is Dee Morn, our Environmental Health Service Manager. Dee, would you like to open the discussion on this one, please?
Thank you, Chairman. So I brought this paper today. It's the review of the public space protection orders. So just as a bit of background, the public space protection orders were introduced in October 2017. They were introduced as part of the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act, which came into place in 2014. The orders replaced all dog control orders and designated public place orders within the district, and it also updated existing bylaws where applicable. There is a 3-yearly review cycle, and that's an opportunity for us to introduce new requirements. So I have, in Appendix 1, I have put together the orders that exist in North Somerset, and the report recommends that the panel renew all those unchanged and existing public space protection orders that are in that list in Appendix 1. Apologies as well, the URLs that are in that link, the links to the website, they unfortunately have been broken since I prepared this report. So apologies for that, they will shortly be fixed. It's the result of the upgrade of the website. So in Appendix 1 that's with the report are all the orders that we're asking as part of this report today for the recommendation to renew those and to retain them. And then final sign-off will be in September with the executive for that. There are also a number of proposals that have been put forward for new and amended orders, and there is a workshop meeting to be held next week to discuss those with members in further detail. We did have a previous workshop, however, we didn't get through all the proposals that were put forward at that time. So it was felt to push that forward to another workshop, and then there will be a further opportunity to discuss those orders before consultation. So the second part of the report is a recommendation to the panel to undertake a public consultation on those new and amended public space protection orders following the workshop session that is taking place on the 21st of July. Is there anything that you have to ask me?
Thank you for that, Dee. So just to confirm for members, we've got a session, I think it's an invitation would have gone out next Tuesday afternoon, 2:30 to 3:30, to pull together some of that detailed feedback, particularly for the new orders, which was discussed at a recent Community Safety Steering Group session. So as Dee was saying, what's in the appendix are literally all of those orders previous orders which we wish to retain. If we don't go through this current process, they don't automatically get carried over. They basically fall. So hence the importance of this process leading to the eventual renewal of all the PSPOs, both old and new, in October. So effectively, the session today, next week, will kickstart the consultation. Indeed, in terms of the dates of the consultation, that's pretty much going to be over the entire, period of August and September. Do we have fixed dates for that yet?
We don't have fixed dates for that yet. I imagine it will be the middle of August towards the middle of September, so that we have the results back in time for the 21st of October executive.
Thank you. I think there are probably some members who wish to speak to this, but I can't see who they are because I've got something.
Chairman, if I can.
Peter,
Yeah, thank you.
Go first.
Yeah, I agree with what Dee just said. I did look at the other 55 items that were on the list, and I tried to put them together in where I think is a very similar order needed, but not a full list. And 25 refer to vehicle problems. There's a lot of ones about phishing, things, usual ones you would expect, antisocial behaviour and dog fouling, which are always the high up ones. But I've done a survey of those and tried to put them together, so that should make it a bit easier next week.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for that. Any other members wishing to speak?
There are no other questions in the chat, Councillor Bridger, apart from Councillor Elaine Morgan has asked a question.
John, would you like to ask your question?
If it would be helpful, what he's asking is, can we vote on those that are going to be renewed?
In their entirety, presumably, John means. Do we need to do that today?
Won't that be in the end after consultation?
Yes, I mean this will eventually go to the executive on the 9th of September, I believe. So I'm not sure we need to really take a vote. I think we need to just sort of note what Dee's bringing to the panel this afternoon, and if we have any specific questions about the process, really, because we can look at this in more detail next week, and members will have another opportunity effectively as part of the consultation process to have another go at this as well, if there are any particular ones they wish to might have issue with, or some of their constituents. So I'm not sure we need a vote. Any other questions from members?
There are no other questions in the chat.
Okay. Dee, I think we're happy with this. This is excellent. Appreciate the process so far, and the future opportunities as we'll have to look at this. It's something that I think is actually really important to our residents, and something we might touch on a little bit later in terms of enforcement. I know we're looking to boost our enforcement of some of these issues that actually do concern our residents a great deal. We certainly all get a lot of emails about some of these issues. Thank you, members. I take it as read that we note the report and look forward to those of you who can attend the session on Tuesday afternoon next week. Can we move on to item 7, your neighbourhood consultation and engagement? This is to get an update from the consultation, which I think was started in mid-February, seems a long time ago now, and closed on the 7th of May. And I know, as Gemma will, I'm sure, tell us, we weren't able to, we were quite ambitious in terms of the consultation and engagement around this piece, but we weren't able to undertake all of the face-to-face engagement sessions. 2 or 3 of those dropped off at the end because of lockdown, effectively, but the public online consultation continued until the 7th of May, and Gemma has brought some of the headline themes to the panel this afternoon. Gemma, I invite you please to talk to your report.
Sure. Hi, good afternoon, everybody. That was a great introduction, thanks, Steve, because we were very ambitious with the neighbourhood consultation. I think we had quite a few sessions in with Scrutiny and with other members. We were really keen on not only doing an online consultation, but going out into neighbourhoods and hearing from people and talking to people who wouldn't normally take part in council consultations. The report outlines what we managed to do and what we unfortunately didn't manage to do because of lockdown. So we started off in late February, early March, doing some outreach sessions. So in the Sovereign Centre was one of them, in the Healthy Living Centre in Bourneville was another one, where officers were able to sort of go round those centres and engage with people, encourage them to fill in some of the consultations, but have some really good conversations with people as well. We then started on our programme, we'd planned 7 evening sessions where in different neighbourhoods where we were inviting people to come along and take part. And the first one, which I think was on the 2nd of March, was in Nailsea, and it was really successful. Sort of 60 odd people came along to it. The room was full of people. We ran it as discussion tables with almost, I think, me banging on a glass like at a wedding to move people around when they'd had their 20 minutes on each topic. And every table was full. We got some really good conversations going. The next one was on the 9th of March, which was the same day that Boris announced that people should limit the interactions they had socially and basically not go out. So that one wasn't quite so well attended. And then obviously after that, we cancelled the rest of the sessions. So one of my reflections is that there was definitely an appetite and a sort of need for these conversations in communities, and it was looking really successful. But obviously, then unfortunately, we didn't manage to complete the programme of evening and sort of face-to-face meetings that we'd planned. And then the bit that we really didn't manage to do at all, apart from one disability forum meeting, was the targeted engagement, again with different groups that we just wanted to make sure took part in the consultation that we really wanted to hear from. So you might remember we were talking about doing some focus groups in secondary schools and colleges, and doing sessions with primary schools, going to all the different equalities forums, and also doing some sessions with some interest groups in our different neighbourhoods. So we there were some refugee groups and some just other ways into neighbourhoods that we often don't use in order to get feedback of the consultation. And unfortunately, we didn't manage to do any of those things. So the schools closed, the colleges closed, nobody was meeting. So we missed out on a big chunk of the consultation. So, I mean, what we did get, so we have actually got some really rich data. The online consultation carried on. It was, I think it's 1,992 people took part, which is a reasonable result. So it was, it was quite a lot of people. What was really interesting is that over 2/3 of those people that were filling in online surveys that was in the period where we were heavily promoting and doing the face-to-face sessions, and then it tailed off quite a lot, and the remaining, that was in the first 4 weeks, and then the remaining 8 weeks, it was the final sort of 600 odd people took part in the online survey. But I think we were showing that being out there talking about it was also really boosting that online participation as well. But anyway, 2,000 is a good result, I'm told from Emma. That's not bad, and we can use that data quite well. One of the things that we're planning so I'll go on to some of the results in a minute, but if you remember, there were 5 different strands of the consultation for 5 different service areas. There was leisure and sports, libraries, green waste, garden waste, street cleansing, and parks and grounds maintenance. All of those are developing into their own work strands, and again we'll talk about that in a second, but all of them require further work, whether it's contract renewals or strategies or a bit of both. We're proposing that as we develop those pieces of work, we try and go back and fill in those gaps in the consultation that we weren't able to do when we were in the timescale of the Your Neighbourhoods. So, for example, as we start working with Scrutiny on the library strategy, we'd also propose to do some work with young people and potentially through the colleges as we're developing the strategy, just to fill in some of that sort of narrative that we didn't get during the consultation period. So we're aware of where the gaps are, and the consultation results tell us that. So we know there's young people was one of the gaps that we've got across the board. The population that responded tended to be a bit older. So we know we've got some more work to do. So we're proposing to do that as we develop the strategies, and so not just give up on it because of lockdown, just try and fill it in at a later date. So I just wanted to reassure you about that. So that's, I can pause there. That's the update on what we did in the consultation and how we approached it, where we can see the gaps and what we're proposing to do about those gaps. So I don't know if that's a good time to invite questions just about that bit before I go on to the results. Steve, I don't know whether you had anything to mention or whether you think I should just carry on.
Well, I mean, I was going to ask. I mean, you've answered the first question I had, which was specifically, I highlighted the bit in the report where you'd said, where you basically highlighted that those gaps that you referred to. So I'm really, really pleased actually to hear that as this work branches out into its different strands, we'll be making a point and factor in the engagement of those groups who weren't able to take full part in the consultation because of the lockdown. So I'm really pleased to hear that. I think 2,000 responses is very positive. Particularly, I think, is because this was the way this was packaged, and I think this was packaged up really well, and it made sense to pull all these things together. It was quite daunting, perhaps, for some people when faced with that consultation of that scale. So do we have a sense of how that split? I mean, did 1,992 people fill in all 5 or 6 areas? Were there some areas? I think you've got some numbers in your report against each area, but a sense of were people homing in on garden waste, or were there a lot of interest on certain areas more than others?
I think garden waste was definitely the one that people filled in the most. So of the 2,000 people that took part, 1,500 of them filled in garden waste. So some people filled in all 5. Some people picked 1 or 2 that they were most interested in. So garden waste was the one that predominantly people were really interested in. And then I think leisure and sports centres was the one with the fewest individual responses. So that was somewhere in the region of 700. And then the other, I think, street cleansing was somewhere in the region of 900. The numbers are in the report. So yeah, there's sort of graduating scales of interest on the different topics. There were 2,000 individuals that took part, and then garden waste was the most responded to. And garden waste was, to Colin's delight, was the one where people were crowding around the tables at the face-to-face sessions as well, and he had a queue of people waiting to talk to him at all of our face-to-face sessions. So, but what was interesting actually was that the people's initial reaction was quite negative about garden waste, but in those sessions we had some really good conversations, and I think people left in a different place than when they entered the conversation. So we were able to have a conversation and just talk about what it was that people were worried about, and pretty much everyone came in saying, I don't like this, I'm not going to use it, I wouldn't pay for it. And the vast majority of people left saying, yeah, okay, I suppose I can see what you're doing. I still don't like it, but I probably will carry on using it, and I get it a bit more now. So it was, that was the other thing that would have been really useful about being able to do all of those sessions, but we just weren't able to because of the timing.
Absolutely.
So shall I share some of the results? There's a lot of information here, so I'm going to go through, sort of almost rattle through it, because I know that we've got limited time this afternoon. Go on, sorry, Steve.
Just pause there a second. I know that some members indicated they want to speak.
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
I just wondered whether, so for example, John and Stuart, I don't know, Sarah Conling also wanted to speak. Have you got specific questions about what Gemma might have said so far, or would you be willing to wait until Emma's finished the presentation?
If I may briefly say on there,
yes, go ahead, John.
Gemma and all who've been doing this. First, I want to say well done at getting this number of people, because as far as I can tell, that's probably more than we've managed to get before. Obviously, on my own personal view is we need to do better, of course, but I think that's really good. And in terms of the format of the report, if I may, please, you've got under garden waste, you've got the number of responses, but under libraries, you have 79% used. It's different.
Sorry.
It's not giving the numbers, so you can't get a picture overall. And you have explained it verbally, but you haven't actually got it in the report. And there will be another question later on, but I'll hold that for when you've explained it more. Thank you very much. And well done, definitely.
I know that Stuart, as a member of the panel, do you want to ask your question? And I'll come to Sarah. I'll come to you in a sec.
Okay, thank you, Chair. It was just about the consultation, really. I appreciate it was obviously forced upon us by COVID, and I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate as much as you could before lockdown occurred. But is there a risk that because of COVID and because of the online survey being most of the response, that those without access to the internet may not have been able to feed in as much as possible? And do we think there's some options with the restrictions now eased a little bit that we can take to try and redress that balance going forward?
Yes, is the short answer, Stuart. I think that's what we're proposing to do with the next steps, is to try to fill those gaps and potentially have some, if we can, some face-to-face engagement, if that's possible, or at the very least an online forum like this. But I take your point about people without access to the internet, and again, that was part of the design to try and fill that gap. So my intention is absolutely to get as many people involved as possible. We are slightly restricted by what we're allowed to do. At the moment, it looks like we might be allowed to do a bit more, so we might want to try and get it in quickly in case things change again. But I think we can do what we can do, and we've definitely got the ambition to engage as many people as possible. It's quite a difficult time to do that, I think I'd reflect, and difficult to plan. But
yeah, I absolutely understand the difficulty of the situation, but thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Gemma. Councillor Sarah Codling. Sarah, would you like to chip in at this point? Ask your question.
Yeah, afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Chairman. Not a member of this panel, but thank you for the opportunity. Sorry to arrive later as well, Gemma. So if you've covered everything I'm asking, apologies. And again, well done, particularly in the very challenging times that we face for the work that you've done. I'm from a previous professional capacity around community engagement. I'm really interested in whether we do any stakeholder segmentation. And that speaks to some of what Councillor McQuillan was asking, I think, about are we having basically a skew from those who are able to access online, and what do we do with that information if we do know it? And secondly, again, from a current professional viewpoint, I work for a charity supporting self-advocacy for adults with learning disabilities and autism. So if we're asked to consult with our members, that isn't a case of just quickly holding a focus group. We need to get information into an easy read format. We need to facilitate that so we have meaningful engagement. That takes a lot of work and a lot of time. So I just wonder if we can do a bit more on that and whether that's on the radar. Sorry, big long questions.
that's okay. I think the answer to the first part, and I know we've got Emma Diaco on this call as well, who I haven't asked to prepare for this, so it's very unfair, but I know that we do segment the data and we're using that segmentation in order to target what we do next in terms of consultation. I completely take your point about the easy read format and the right formatting to engage with people. One of the meetings we had very early on was to go to the Disability Forum and to talk to the Disability Forum about how we make sure that we can engage with people who can't as easily access some of the information that the council produces. And we had conversations about easy read, plain English, access for people who are visually impaired and hearing impaired, and particularly with some of the face-to-face sessions, as well as what else we could do. And the Disability Forum were helping us get the word out to the individual groups that they represented. And we didn't, I don't remember doing the work to put things into the easy read format. So I think we could probably do more on that in that area. But I think, again, we did a lot of work on how to make sure we could engage with a variety of disabilities. I'm not sure whether we did the easy read format work, but we'll make sure that we pick that up next time, and maybe we can do that in our next phase of engagement. And Emma's got her hand up, and I think she's probably got something to say about the segmentation of data.
Go ahead, Emma.
Hello. I was just going to jump in and say that as part of the consultation, we ask a series of questions around demographics, and also whether someone was answering in the form of a resident or they're answering as a representative of an organisation. And as part of the analysis, we take all of those different demographics and put together a more segmented overview of the results, which are not included in the presentation that Gemma's been sharing with you, but they are included in some of the data sets. So the team managers and service leads have that information, which can then feed into decisions made from there on in. Just picking up as well around the way that we generally engage and consult with our residents. As councillors will know, we've done quite a bit of work recently about reviewing that with the executive member to basically understand what our current consultation activity was, what it looks like now. We've made lots of improvements to our consultation portal. And I believe up to this point, Councillor Coughlin, we have been offering people easy read formats. Again, I'll have to check. I'm not sure if we did on the neighbourhood management one, but we usually have some text in that says if you need an easy read format of this, or you'd like a plain English version, that we can provide that if necessary. If we did miss that, we can certainly ensure that it's included next time.
Thanks very much, Emma. Just before we move on to perhaps your presentation, Gemma, one further question about process, I suppose, is to what extent we're able to, or do we keep those who participated in the consultation engaged and informed, to keep that loop open and to eventually obviously close that loop. What do we do in that respect?
I think Emma has got her hand up. I think she's got the answer to this one.
Yeah, so one of the new things that we brought in when we looked at our consultation portal, this is the eConsult portal, which is on our website, was that following a consultation, when all the analysis had been done, there's a slide pack that's produced that then gets put on that same site. And if you've taken part in that consultation or you're registered as a member of eConsult, you tick certain boxes to say you're interested in this topic or that topic, you'll receive an email to say that that's available within your area of interest. So the results will go as part of the consultation portal for people to view. That's one of the ways. We also collected asked people if they were interested in further information or taking part in further consultation engagement, and they provided their email addresses. And I'm sure Gemma can chip in with what we'll plan to use those for. But we have a way to close that loop and give that information back and ensure that people continue to be informed and engaged.
Great, that's good.
So
Thank
like
you.
Emma said, each
Gemma,
of the services has got a list of email addresses of people that are interested in that particular area. And there's two things that we asked for most of the services. One was, do you want to be kept informed of the outcome? That sort of question. And the other one was, do you want to actively take part in, so for example, for parks, would you actively take part as a volunteer? For garden waste, are you interested in community composting and being part of the development of that in your area? So we've got a sort of, do you want to be kept informed bit, and also a, do you want to actively take part as an interested resident list as well. And we've got contact details and email addresses for all of those people.
Thank you. Do you want to move on, Gemma, to your presentation?
So like I said, I'm going to go fairly quickly through this because there's a lot of information. And what I would say is what we're going to talk about when I've finished is the next steps for scrutiny engagement in all of these things. So I want to reassure everyone that you're going to have a chance to see this data and look at it in much greater detail than me rattling through it now. It's just to give you an idea of what we've got and then what we're intending to do with it and what the outcomes are. So I'm going to share a slide deck with you. There we go. Just it takes a moment or two to. Can I just check that everyone can see something on the screen? If just a nod or yeah.
Yep, I can. Yep.
So this slide deck we can share with Scrutiny, and we might. There's a few more things to put in it, which is why I didn't share it at the time of publication because it's still a work in progress. And so the first slide just overviews the consultation approach, which we talked about. So the survey, the targeted meetings, and then the sort of targeted engagement, some of which took place and some of it which we didn't. And again, I've verbally talked through this about how many responses and the face-to-face engagement we did manage to do. And then there were quite a lot of things that we didn't manage to do. So the next steps, if I quickly take you through because it was obviously quite a while ago that we last talked about this. The next steps are to complete the consultation report. So because we had so many responses and because we wanted to go into quite a lot of detail, it's taking quite a long time to analyse all of the free text that we invited as part of the consultation. But we're working hard to get the consultation report finished and put on the portal. Like Emma said, everybody that took part will receive notification that it's there so people can look at it. Then specifically for the different work strands, so the garden waste collection service, the next steps are to incorporate the consultation feedback into a draft design of the script scheme and do that alongside CLT and CLT exec first, just because we need to sort of check that practically some of the ideas might work. But what we really want to make sure we do is work alongside Scrutiny, so sort of early engagement with Scrutiny on the detail. With garden waste, it's something we talked about from, I think, the very first time I came to Scrutiny and met some of you at the waste subgroup. We talked about engaging Scrutiny in that design. So I think, and Steve will go through this in more detail later, but our proposal is that quite soon, so probably in September after the holidays, we come to Scrutiny Waste subgroup with all the details of the consultation and start co-designing what the garden waste service will look like, and then take it through the sort of internal sign-off process. The sort of timescales we're looking at are we've missed the boat this summer in terms of bringing in a charging service, so we're looking at sort of early 2021 for launching it. So those are the rough timescales we're working to at the moment. And then there's a lot of engagement needed here. Like I said, when we did particularly the NAILSy and some of the other face-to-face sessions in Western, by talking to people, we were having conversations that sort of changed people's views, or at least helped with the understanding of what we were doing and why. So we'd like to do more of that, so that as we bring in this new thing, it feels a bit more palatable to people in neighbourhoods. So the next strand was libraries, and again, the library's ambition was to use the consultation feedback alongside the community asset review from 2018. My apologies, I got the date wrong there. To design a library strategy that will describe what libraries are going to do and be for the future for North Somerset. So we're looking at probably a 10-year strategy just to try and describe what it is we want to do with libraries. And again, I think for libraries, it's really important that we do that additional engagement. So including groups underrepresented by the consultation, which we know some of them are Black and Asian minority ethnic groups, young people, and there were some other gaps in people that aren't digitally included at the moment. And so we want to do some more work on that and work closely with Scrutiny on the emerging strategy. And again, Steve will go into more detail later, but there's a proposed inquiry day coming up in the autumn, and we'd seek to use some of that to sort of start informing a library strategy and work closely with Scrutiny on that. So the next bit was leisure and sports facilities. So we want to use the consultation feedback to draft the leisure and sports strategy for North Somerset. And we've done a lot of the technical stuff in the background, so all of that's pretty much ready. But and that'll help alongside the consultation results. That'll help inform a strategy. And again, working closely with Scrutiny on this one, I think we're proposing. Philippa's going to be sending out an email shortly to invite members to be part of a focus group, not a focus group, a task and finish group to work on this strategy development, as well as the looking at leisure for the recovery period, as we discussed in exec a couple of weeks ago. And the timescale for that, we're looking at bringing the strategy to end of October exec. So hence we'd have a pre-meeting sometime before the summer holidays with maybe a bit of background reading about the data for members that want to be involved, and then come back together in September and have a detailed session to look at the developing the leisure and sports strategy. And then grounds maintenance and street cleansing. We wanted to use the what have I done? So we want to incorporate the consultation feedback into the specification for the service in this. There's also some other interesting things that came out of these two consultations in terms of volunteering and people's appetite for more enforcement and things like that. So there's some other pieces of work that'll drop out of those consultations. And again, the waste package of work and some of the enforcement stuff we saw as being part of the waste subgroup, but again up for discussion. And again, we had a conversation a little bit earlier about grounds maintenance and parks and engagement with Scrutiny on that. So I suppose what I wanted to say is all of these things, we see a close relationship with Scrutiny and the development of the work that comes out of it. They're all public facing services that people really care about. So I think it's really important that we develop that relationship and work together on it. I'm so sorry, I've brought up the wrong slide deck, I think. Right, my apologies. I need to pull that one down and
Okay, Gemma.
sorry,
That's okay.
I'm having a few IT issues here because it now won't, oh, there we go, stop presenting. There we go. Very sorry about that. I have got the right slide deck open on my computer. It's just here we go. Can I just check again, sorry, that people can see this one?
Yeah, we can see see it, I think. It's not in presentation mode yet, but
Okay. Right. So can you see a slide that says Consult North Somerset?
yes, I can.
Yes.
Sure.
Right, sorry about this. It's showing a bit strangely on my screen. So again, we've talked the background's in the report. So when I share this information, so John, this is what you were looking for, which is the breakdown of the number of responses to the different consultations. So 1,992 in total, 1,400 garden waste, 600 odd sports and leisure, and sort of in the early 800s for all the other services. These are draft results of the analysis by topic, simply because we're still analysing some of the free text data. And then in terms of sample size, we've got plenty of responses to make it a decent sample size. But like we said before, we know that in age-wise, we're light on under 30s engagement. Ethnicity, less than 2% of responses from a Black, Asian or minority ethnic group. 40% are retired. So again, the sort of working population was underrepresented. And there are lots of, there are some areas that are overrepresented and some areas that are underrepresented. So again, this will all help us to target the next stage. So in brief, the sort of things that we've been able to analyse. So first of all, how do you currently recycle garden waste?
Gemma, can I just stop you for a second?
Yeah.
I'm just still seeing your slide deck with the thumbnails on the left. So
right.
The slides aren't moving on for me. And I think you probably have moved on to the back.
I have moved on. There's Emma wants to say something as well. Sorry, Emma.
I was just going to say I do have the slides open on my computer as well. If you want to try and see if my IT is behaving itself.
We could do. I suppose otherwise, what we could do is I could circulate it to members because it's quite detailed, and I'm aware that we could potentially get lost in some of the detail. So I could circulate the detail for people to look at their leisure and ask questions. And in the meantime, maybe Steve, if you wanted to open up the conversation about scrutiny engagement with these topics. If I've done enough background of what we've done and what the plans are for with the data, maybe we use the next opportunity that we get together to share the detailed data. I think it might be the sheer size of the slide deck because there's quite a lot of information and loads of graphs in there that's preventing it from being easily shared. Oh, you're on mute, Steve.
Oh, sorry, that makes sense. I've unmuted myself. Stuart, did you have a question?
Just a couple of quick points. Thank you for that, Gemma. Two things really. I'm really glad you talked about trying to keep the conversation going on garden waste, because I think with it being delayed into next year, and completely understand why it has, there'll be a need to continue the conversation and momentum to go forward, so that we don't end up with a similar sort of conversation again next year without hopefully having learned from the consultation in terms of the education aspects. And I'm really pleased that the engagement has helped with that, though. The second point was something I'm getting more correspondence on is around gully maintenance and street cleaning. And I think, having seen the slide, I can see that's rapidly increasing and maybe the number 2 topic. So maybe that's something that policy and scrutiny might want to engage with as well. I appreciate we already have an awful lot on the work plan, but it's just something to think about.
Thank you, Stuart. In terms of discussion now on scrutiny engagement on these topics, certainly in terms of libraries, leisure and sports facilities, the community engagement element, I'd like to wait until we can cover those off, and when we look at the work plan, I think towards the end of the meeting. In terms of ground maintenance and street cleansing, I think that might come up in the next session when we've got John, I think, talking about rewilding. I link those two things together. And in terms of garden waste, I think you covered it, Gemma. I think we're looking at the waste scrutiny steering group to work with you and your team on that towards. I think you previously mentioned that the decision on the charging was made by the executive in January, but you're keen. I think you mentioned that. You've already mentioned that you're keen to work very closely with scrutiny in terms of the implementation and shaping of what that new service looks like. And again, I think that'd be the waste scrutiny steering group that probably works with you on that. But on the other items, I think I'd prefer just to pause and look at them later in the meeting. I think we're going to touch on them. Any questions from members at this stage?
There's nobody on Teams, but I don't know if Councillor Crew, because he's on the telephone and can't indicate whether he has any questions.
I think I'm here. Can you hear me?
Well done, Peter. We can hear you, Peter, and there's no interference. We can't even hear your breathing.
There you are.
Clearly you are. So excellent.
I'd agree. It's an excellent report, and it does show things are going in the right way. But I do think it's important. I know you said we're going to cover it later on, but I do think in the consultation, the most important in this is many people don't associate walkways with street cleaning, and they tend to overlook. I was speaking to someone the other day, and they said it's terribly overgrown down through here. I said, well, why haven't you said anything? You said your street is fine, but the walkway is terrible. So I do think we need to concentrate with a new contract coming out. I think the parks and open spaces, bear in mind the town councils also pay North Somerset contractors for grass cutting and so on. So I do think it's important that we spend some time with your working group on the new contract and making sure we've got the spec right to make sure we don't get this situation. Now we're encouraging more people to cycle and walk, and then I get complaints because they go down the walkway, the safe walk to school is all overgrown. It doesn't make a lot of sense to be saying, well, yes, we want you to walk, but sorry, it's all overgrown and the pavements are cracked because the weeds are coming up through the pavement as you get around this area. So I do think we need to spend some time and say that is probably 1 and 2, as I said earlier. Gully clearing is another one we know is a problem, especially round by here where they're going to do the Summer Lane flood relief scheme, which is starting next week. 2 of the problems there is the gullies are always filling. The road floods, even though it's not caused by the Summer Lane incident. But I do think it's things like that we do need to spend a lot of time on looking more carefully how the new contract will interact with the new way we need to do things. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I think you're right. The 2 things you've mentioned, gully clearance and overgrown footways, I think those are, again, we get lots of correspondence from residents on those things. And as I alluded to in my remarks earlier in the meeting, when people see tasks that are being done that they think perhaps could be left, and then others that are important to them not being done, there's some communication I think that needs to be, some work and some communication around that I think would be useful. Gemma, would it be helpful if you shared a little bit on the enforcement? We hope to bring in some further enforcement. We touched on this at a Waste Scrutiny Steering Group meeting recently, but obviously not all members were present. Would you be able to share something on that?
Of course. So one of the things that came out of the consultation that you'll see in the breakdown of the data once I circulate it is there's a really strong appetite from respondents for more robust enforcement for things like littering and dog fouling and some waste offences. And also we've observed, particularly in the last sort of 6 to 8 weeks, that we've had huge spikes in littering and with people coming to the area, with people having picnics more, and we've had a real litter problem, in litter in particular, but also other issues with dog fouling, and we have a continual fly tipping issues as well. So we've been looking at ways to up our enforcement against some of these offences. There's obviously a mandate from the public, and when we spoke to the Waste Steering Group, there was an appetite there as well to do more for enforcement. So we're looking at working with an external organisation who will provide enforcement officers for us. It's cost neutral to the council, so the council don't have to pay for it, and it's undertaken at the risk of that company. The fines that are paid, the money that comes in is shared between the company and the council. We're undergoing a process at the moment where we're just checking that the way that it's carried out fits in with our corporate values. And so what we don't want is people coming in and being too draconian, but equally what we do want is a way of tackling all the issues with litter and other environmental crimes. So we're doing it quite quickly. We're looking at a timescale of trying to bring it in as soon as possible, and possibly end of August, beginning of September if not. And when we spoke to the waste subgroup last week, we talked about once we've sort of got some more information from the company, circulating it to Scrutiny members so that you can make some comments on it, and doing a trial period. So we're looking at a year's trial of having enhanced enforcement. Also, at the same time, we're training up the seafront rangers to undertake enforcement on western seafront at the moment, but also looking at expanding that in other areas, because we need to do something now and for the summer. So we've got some body cams from parking, and we've got Dee and Alan from parking helping train these officers to do some enforcement now, and then hopefully bulk it out with these extra people coming in, but really up our game on enforcement and tackling these environmental crimes. So we had a sort of positive response from the waste subgroup. So we're continuing with that work with the intention of keeping Scrutiny up to date and doing some education alongside it with the littering campaign and some other work like that, and then bringing it in as soon as possible.
Chairman, if I can just interrupt there.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Peter, go ahead.
Right, this is crossing over into the public space protection order realm. We had this discussion about the possibility of an outside firm coming in to do it. We would be foolish to introduce that before we introduce the revised public space protection orders. They should run concurrent with each other, so therefore there's no misunderstanding. If you start doing something now and we amend the public space protection orders, which are slightly different, somebody could be prosecuted now or get a fine, which won't apply later on, and vice versa. So I think it's important, if we're going to do it, and I think we did say this previously when we were reviewing public space protection orders, that if you did this, it would come in concurrently. So you introduce more people doing the job, which I said before we do need, as soon as you introduce the revised orders.
Peter, you make a very good point, and if he raised it, I think on the 9th of July, I apologies, I missed it. I think that's a very, very good point. Gemma, do you have an immediate reaction to that?
Sure. Yeah, so I suppose a bit of reassurance. So obviously we've been working hand in hand with Dee on this, to check that it's appropriate to do it in this timescale alongside the public space protection orders. So obviously the things that these extra people would be enforcing are things that are already possible to enforce in North Somerset. So these enforcement officers could enforce any fixed penalty notice, and they can be directed by us as to what they do. So the conversations that we've had with Dee and team have recognised that yes, we are bringing in new PSPOs or amended PSPOs. We are looking at potentially removing litter as a PSPO and just using the primary offence in the Environmental Protection Act, because it's a bit slicker, really, particularly if we're going to do lots of littering prosecutions, which this will probably result in. I think for the courts, it's a little bit more robust to use the primary legislation, although both are perfectly valid. So Dee's very comfortable with the timescales and what we're doing, and then it doesn't interfere with the PSPO process. And B,
I totally disagree with that. Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you because we're going to consultation on public space protection orders.
Yeah.
We would be foolish to do anything different with that consultation going on until that's ended, vetted by the council, agreed by the executive, and put into practice. Whether we take stuff out of public space protection orders and do it through the law in a different way is fine, but we would be silly when we're in the middle of doing something as a review that we have to do every 3 years. We would be silly to do anything different until that review is complete.
And do you mean by different doing more enforcement on it? Because obviously we're not changing anything else. So it doesn't affect the PSPOs themselves.
Well, I disagree with some of the comments, and bear in mind I can't see anything you presented because I'm on the telephone. Maybe it's different when I see it or when you send it through. But I just see we've had this before. We had the same thing when we brought parking enforcement in with the original PSPOs. We agreed what we were going to do, and then it all went wrong, and it's taken some time to get it right again. I just think that when you're changing things, however you do it, if you introduce new ways of operating and bring outside firms in, when you're in the middle of doing a review, there's bound to be a crossover.
I take your point, Peter. There's the potential for confusion, and if we were to proceed, at the very least, we'd need to look at the communications around this. I'd welcome other which we can take away, but I welcome other members' comments. Stuart, Councillor McQuillan.
I think Gemma's partially answered this already, but I take the point. There is obviously a risk of moving quickly, but at the same time, it seems like there is a way of managing that risk by using the Environmental Protection Act, and it sounds like there is a plan in place. Perhaps it's just something we need to keep an eye on. And also, I understand that these protection orders are probably already in place rather than being new. I do take the point around making sure that enforcement is valid and legal and we don't end up in difficulties in court. I think from what I've seen, it looks like it's a manageable risk, but I do take the Councillor's point.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. I think you're right that Gemma will have a plan in place. I think we'll take this one away, Gemma. If we'll have a conversation out of this meeting on that. It could be merely, an issue of how this is communicated. But I absolutely, take Councillor Crew's point, and thank you, Peter, for raising it. I think we'll have to look at that.
Yeah, sure.
Any other comments on?
No, there's no one else, Chairman. Oh, sorry, I spoke too soon. Councillor Cato has just popped up.
John.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just an aside comment. I like the idea in many ways of outsourcing it with no cost to the council, so it becomes balanced and all that. I have experienced in the past, though, the risk of getting the wrong way of doing that and it being exploitative in some way. And I would just caution that as and when we move forward in this direction, if we do, that it's carefully assessed from that point of view.
Yeah, I completely agree, John. And we're aware that there were some operators in this area that have had sort of panorama programs and some negative press around this. So we're being very careful to make sure that there's no incentivization for the individuals working on this, no personal financial incentives for them to give out as many tickets as possible, or any of those practices that have driven a sort of less balanced enforcement approach in the past. So we're being, and again, that's the sort of information that we were proposing to circulate to Scrutiny, so that we could sort of show the ethics of the company and the way they will operate. And then before we sign up to anything, just give councillors the opportunity to have a look at that and check that it does fit in with all of our collective understanding about how we want the council to function.
Yes, thank you very much. Very reassuring.
It was also covered, John, to some extent at our meeting on the 9th of July in the waste scrutiny, when Gemma brought the enforcement item. So, for example, and I think Gemma mentioned it today, the education element to this. So, for example, we wouldn't be heavy-handed to a group of 16, 17-year-olds who are on Salthouse Fields or something in Clevedon. It would be a different approach, a careful approach. So more of an educational angle there. So yeah, it's. I think we'll take this away, and I think it's will ensure that members get the information that they need to understand fully how this is going to work. Picking up on Councillor Crew's points. Yeah, I think Terry, did you want to say something on this?
Yeah, just can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
That's right, because I didn't have any sound earlier on when you asked the roll call. Yeah, can you make sure you liaise with town and parish council on this as well? Because things like the street cleaning and that, our parish council, we do that ourselves. North Somerset doesn't do that, but we do rely on you, and we could do with more on action with dog fouling and some of the other issues, you know. And if you're going to set up someone to do it, we need a good means of communication so that we can do some of this. But when we do it, what we need to do is publicise a little bit, certainly locally within our parish as well, to try and stop people doing some of it. But on the recycling bit, certainly when we went from the bins before to the large green bins, we had a lot of litter tipping then around, you know, fly tipping of small amounts around our footpaths, which we had to deal with. And I think that is going to be an issue when we go to charging, which is why we didn't want to do it. But I think it will be a concern with that, because a lot of people in the village here are saying they might change their mind, but a lot are saying they aren't going to pay for the new bins. And of course, a lot of them have a lot of green recycling because they've all got gardens. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Particularly for the point about town and parish councils, you're absolutely right. Spot on. That's very important. I think, Gemma, thank you very much for that.
No problem.
I'd like to move on to item 8 on the agenda. I think we've got John Flanagan with us. So this is an update on the rewilding programme. This is something that the panel been monitoring quite closely, and John has very kindly been bringing regular reports to us. We've obviously been through the first phase of tree planting over the winter, well, late winter, January, February time. John, are you receiving us loud and clear?
No, I can hear you. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you very clearly indeed, actually. John, would you like to present your report?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is a bit of a weather report as well, I'm afraid. So just some reflections on the rewilding in February. We planted the trees in probably the wettest ever February, and then which made it all very difficult for everybody, and many of you were involved in the activity, and I'm sure you can remember it. The second part of the weather report in terms of the rewilding we did in February is that we had perhaps the driest spring we've ever had, and unfortunately that combination has had an impact on the trees that we planted. So I just wanted to share the update on that and the proposed programme. So in terms of phase 1, this was the planting of 5,000 trees in February. We have been kind of monitoring the results. We'd expect maybe 30% death rate of these sorts of trees and this type of planting. In some areas, we've identified up to 80% failure rate. That is something that is beyond our control, and it is really weather dependent. We did water trees partly way through, but it's very difficult to water 5,000 trees, especially during a COVID outbreak. Another part of our strategy was to engage with local residents, and those local residents were going to help us water and weed the trees and put down mulch and so on. And of course, COVID prevented us working with volunteers. So I think if you'd have asked me at the start, what would you not want to happen after planting those 5,000 trees, it all actually happened. So that was a big problem for us. But it's one of the things that when you manage a natural environment, you're faced with, and you just got to move on with it. So our plans are still to continue delivering tree planting. So our objectives at the moment are to try and plant 20,000 trees this winter. We haven't had a chance to talk to nurseries yet. We don't know quite what production of trees has been, but we'll be catching up on that soon. So there are some kind of challenges going forwards about that as well. The other issue relates to tall grass management. We were going to carry out just a small kind of trial period this summer, but there's such a lot of enthusiasm for tall grass. We actually introduced a significant amount, and we've introduced 100,000 square metres of tall grass management this year, which at our last meeting we weren't going to do. So that's kind of an improvement in the meantime. If the chair doesn't mind, I've got a picture of an area here because we've talked about what it would look like. Would you mind if I just shared this? And
go ahead, John. Yeah, please.
Thank you. Sorry, it's take a little while. So in usual Cocoa panel fashion, my IT has let me down. Sorry,
Yes, you've got some previous, John, on this.
I have got previous, yeah. And
some things don't change, John, do they?
No, I think previously it was. I don't think it was me. I'm going to say it wasn't me previously, but today it might be operator error. Sorry, but if you're out and about, the area that is really quite impressive is Pound Lane in Nailsea. There's a really clear demonstration of where we've got tall grass, trees growing. We've cut the grass alongside the path so it looks managed. We've got signs up that say why we're doing it. We've actually got some local residents there that are helping look after it as well. And so there's quite a lot of interest. Interestingly, with the tall grass management, we've had very few complaints. I don't know whether members have had complaints from residents about it, but feedback from via my team has been minimal about it. So that's quite positive. And so we're bringing forward the tall grass management, and the future discussion will be about how do we expand it, because people are unhappy some areas that we're continuing cutting the grass as we said we always would. The other kind of area for discussion for us is post the consultation we had, when we start to introduce rewilding, there are some residents that object to the proposals, and that kind of throws a programme, and also it's kind of difficult for us to decide how to proceed from there on in. And it could mean that we don't meet our targets and that we'd end up not rewilding as much as we wanted to. So so it's quite a short update really, but one of the things it would be interesting to have a discussion about is how do we deal with those areas where post our consultation residents are unhappy with what happens. On one final point, sorry Chair, on that is that we are proposing to put signs up ahead of our rewilding this autumn stroke winter, so hopefully that will help, but otherwise that's kind of our burning issue really.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of your last point there. That was one of the learnings from the first wave. Before I bring in the Vice Chair, just one question which you briefly touched on there in terms of the tall grass management. In fact, in Yatton, for example, there aren't a lot of areas where we're allowing the grass to grow, and so the complaints I've been receiving, and there have been some, have been where we've continued to cut the grass, where some people, some local groups have would have liked to have seen the grass left a little longer, or for there to be more of a nuanced approach. So, as I think I may have mentioned before, my starting point for this would be, my nirvana would be that before a grass cutting season, officers, our contractor, sit down with maybe the tenant representatives from the tenant parish council, ward member, perhaps local groups, to all sit down and look to see what a mowing regime might look like in that community before anything happens. And we're not in a position for that. We're not there yet. By quite a long stretch actually, and so I personally get quite a lot of pushback from people here. I totally accept we need to listen to everyone. It is at the end of the day a balance. There are equally those people who want everything to see everything cut within a millimetre of its life. There's some education to do there too.
Is now exiting. But
I think it would be interesting if we were to. I was saying in a pre-meeting we had, that when Councillor Gibbons originally brought the rewilding motion to Council July 2019, when I spoke to it then, I talked about using local intelligence, and the people I'd spoken to locally talked about, I think in the noughties, there had been a conference or a workshop involving all the local groups, bringing their expertise and their sort of best practice, their knowledge, and I think it would be an opportune moment perhaps to take sometime in the autumn to take a pause and see if we could host some kind of similar event to ensure we did get there was a balance of voices in the room, but to see what's been done, just to communicate a bit more about why we've done what we've done, why we haven't perhaps been able to do what some people would have liked, just to go over some of this, but in an open forum. Whether we be able to do that physically or not, or online, I'm not sure, but that would be something I would certainly welcome. I'll leave that with you, John, for a second. Stuart, Vice Chair, would you like to make your point?
Thanks. Thank you. First of all, it'd be really helpful, John. Thank you for the update for the Pound Lane photos. They could be circulated, and if they are as good as you say, and I'm sure they are, it might make a good article or something in the future for sort of a success story. It's obviously a shame about the trees, but as you say, with the natural environment and everything going on with COVID, it's unfortunate but unavoidable. In terms of stakeholder management, yeah, I completely agree with everything that the chair has said. I think it was a very hotly competitive consultation, and there were some interesting comments raised, and some of them unfair, but there are certainly some bridges that need to be amended going forward, and I'm sure we can do that if we work together. And I like what the chair was saying about the proposed way forward of almost, where resources allow, deciding on cutting regimes village by village or community by community. In my ward, it's an interesting one, because I have one community that, as you know, unfortunately was a little against the idea. On the other end of the ward was enthusiastic for, and were disappointed they were left out. So it's a very difficult one to judge, and I get comments from residents saying that things need to be cut more often, and comments from residents saying that, oh my God, why did you cut that piece of land? So it's a very, very difficult thing to judge, and it requires a lot of stakeholder management and expertise. I will support, obviously, the chair's concept of some sort of a conference or a meeting in the autumn to try and give a wider update, and also, if it's feasible, I know that there are other interested groups that would like to sort of join the sort of rewilding initiative in North Somerset, and as private landowners potentially get involved themselves. So I think that would be useful. And also, just while I'm talking, I just wanted to say Councillor Codling also has made a good point in the chat, and that I think if we do have a conference or some sort of a communication or explanation in the future, we could perhaps explain, because I think there's good reasons for it, but we need to explain it clearly why we continue with wilding activity, but sometimes we're not seen. And I think sometimes it was a perception, rather than reality, to not continue to maintain verges. And I think we do need to tackle that perception head on.
Thank you, Stuart. I know that Peter's obviously calling in, so can't see the chat. Sarah, are you still with us? Not sure she is. I think she's headed off,
I'm here.
Yeah. Oh, you are. Would you like just to?
Yeah.
Sarah, would you like to articulate the point you left in the chat?
Yeah. Sorry, I thought I may have to go. I think Stuart summarised it really well. But fact is that poor John knows I get quite a few regular complainants from Western Village seeing cycleways, footpaths being pretty much unusable, bearing in mind that we still need to distance, and people are using pushchairs and wheelchairs. So they're overgrown. They appreciate, they've been told by me, as well as officers, that there is a schedule, there's very limited resource, but I think there is already some, and there's certainly a risk of more conflation between, oh well, we're focusing on rewilding, it's all being left to be wild, and the council isn't doing what it must do. So it's clarity of message, and also trying to keep up with the schedules, I guess.
Thank you, Sarah. I think you're right, and I think that Peter alluded to that earlier on, didn't he, when he talked about overgrown footways? I've certainly got that in Yatta.
Chairman, can I just say, by some miracle, I was in the middle of doing an email to John Flanagan about this, and you suddenly popped up without me doing anything. Strange things.
It is a miracle. It is a miracle, Peter. We can see you. Can we come to you in a second, Peter? Can I just take thank you, Sarah, for that. Can I just take Mark? Do you want to chip in first?
Sorry, I was having problems.
Go for it.
I think I won't go with it. I absolutely echo everything that has been said in relation to this. This was, and I, like other councillors, get an extraordinary mix of flack, both brickbats and bouquets at times about this. I think one of the other opportunities, though, is not only to create an event that people can come to and we can explain more and they can share their concerns and aspirations with us, but also that provides us with an opportunity to begin to say to people, for the future, maybe the only way we can make this go forward in a way that people really want is if actually people take up more and more responsibility for the area that they live in. I can't help thinking that, given potentially what may happen in stage 2 of this pandemic, is that the cuts to budgets will come and we will need to look again at what we're doing and so forth. And if we can create an event that not only acknowledges the issues and concerns, but also seeks to recruit communities and neighbourhoods to being part of it, I think that would be really helpful. An inquiry day, a couple of inquiry days, whatever it takes, but something that really says to the community, let's talk. You speak, we'll listen.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much indeed. Peter, I can't see you on my screen, but are you there?
I am here.
Excellent.
I'd agree with that. The reason I was writing to John is because this ward is very strange. 50% are very pleased. It's lovely and clean, no problem. It's the Mead Vale end that's the problem. And it comes back to what was said before, where the walkways aren't necessarily done. But there are the church at Locking Parish Church, Locking Castle Parish Church. There's a strip of land behind them, which they would like to take over, rewire the back half, but actually create 6 parking spaces on this stuff you put on grass to park behind the church. Now, and they would carry on maintenance of that. I think that's another way that if we can find people willing to take on strips of land and do some rewilding, they want to plant some wild flowers, not just let the grass grow. We have to cut the hedge back and everything at the moment. It's a strip which is fair size, but it's out the way. And you just think, well, that's a cost to us. If the church are willing to do it, and there's other areas like that, then it might be a way forward that we're not actually moving it away from us for somebody else to pay for. But if they're willing to do it, that could be a good plan.
I think you're right, Peter. And this, again, I'm reminded of what I said earlier about a dialogue that needs to getting people in a room or a virtual room before the grass cutting season to weigh all of these things up. We're not going to get it right all the time. And I think what we're learning is this is really, really difficult to do. Yeah. And when you're not going to please half the people. But I think what I'm getting from this conversation is, if we're going to leave some tall grass to grow over there, we need to ensure that that people can walk on that pavement, over there, for it not to be overgrown, because we're not going to bring everyone with us. We're not going to bring the people who weren't perhaps that keen on rewilding with us if we're not doing the other thing well at the same time. So it's a tricky thing to do. And you're absolutely right. There are people who would help us get this done, and it might be, it's not going to be one size fits all, and it would have to be done in a way that isn't a burden for officers. But I'm sure there's a way we can do it, and I'm sure there's we get a lot of thanks from residents, I think, if we got this right. Terry, did you have a point to make on this?
Yeah, thanks very much. It's quite interesting, really, because I've just been in discussions with one of the councillors from down in Cornwall, because they've actually now asked, because obviously I'm involved with Bloom, a lot of their towns and villages down there enter our Bloom competition, and they were worried if they left some of the urban bits to grow, that we would be down pointing them when we come to do the judging. Well, that isn't the case. Anything they do towards helping climate change has got to be good, and we would go with that. But it is important that other bits get maintained, like your public rights of way and that. You do need to do those. Otherwise, it looks like, you know, it's a match together. You need to maintain the bits that need to be done for a real reason, and then leave the other bits that you can quite legitimately do. And I think if you want to have a look, go and have a look at Truro, what they've done this year. Because of the not having all the bedding plants, they planted wildflowers in a lot of the beds inside Truro. They sent me some pictures the other day, and they look absolutely splendid in the middle, and saves them a lot of money as well and time. But you know that Devon and Cornwall are a bit ahead of us in doing the rewilding, but they get the same sort of comments. But I think you've just got to be brave with it and try and keep people informed. And the Blue Hearts, which they use quite extensively down there and explain it, does help to say that, you know, we're not doing it to cut back maintenance, because it doesn't cost you any less sometimes, but it doesn't cost you any more to be able to do it. And it's obviously better for the environment. Anyway, well done for what you're doing, John.
Thank you, Tate. John, before I invite you to comment on what you've heard, I think what you've heard is absolutely in the context, as Terry was just saying, of you know, we are overwhelmingly supportive. I mean, the council motion was overwhelmingly supported, and we are incredibly appreciative of the work that you and the team are doing. Jill, did you want to say something? You had your hand up, I think. If you can hear us.
Yes, please. It's not a lengthy question, John, and hello again. It was concerning Ashcombe Park, where we have had a very, very high number of the trees that have died, which I'm sure you know that already. And because I walk the dogs there sometimes, it's nice to have the answer to what then is going to happen, and when might we be replanting them?
Thank you, Jill. John, the floor's all yours.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for all your support, and also the interesting discussion. So particularly with replacing the dead trees, this is a bit of geeky knowledge to share. We call it beating up. I've got no idea why, but replacing dead whip trees is called that. So if someone could find out why and tell me, I'd appreciate it. So what we are going to do is evaluate each site. So some places we probably think we don't need to replace any of them, there's enough survived, and other places where there's been significant deaths, our aim would be to replace them. Probably not as many as initially, but that's our aim.
Okay, so I can offer some hope to the people that ask quite often, and just say, well, hopefully some should be replanted, we hope.
Yeah, that's our intention, definitely.
Yeah, Ashcombe. All right, thank you, John. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Chairman, may I ask a question, please?
Of course you can.
John Lee Morgan. I wondered when my end of the town is going to be embraced by this whole movement. I know that we're on the back burner at the present time, but is there a date earmarked for Uphill Ward and adjacent wards to have some of these trees planted? Because we'll look after them much better.
So we did actually try to plant in every ward, and so we have planted some in your ward. I can share the map with you later if you like, but initially it was we didn't actually plant that many trees. It was a lot of trees in 2 weeks, but as a proportion of the district it wasn't that much. Our intention is to do much more, and we'll be putting a program together, and we've got a new principal tree officer starting at the end of this month, and her first job is to organise a timetable for this winter's planting. So we'll be sharing that as soon as we've organised it. So, and that sort of links back to one of the issues I'd like to kind of reflect on, is the can't even say it, logistical issues related to this. So providing a bespoke grass cutting regime for every parish across the district will be a logistical challenge. So from an operational point of view, I'd kind of want to raise that. I absolutely understand the sentiment behind it, but there would be challenges around doing that, and we'd have to work our way through that. I actually remember that conference that was held probably 10 or 12 years ago or something, and it did prove helpful, and getting people's buy into that. It's actually useful to talk to the people that are interested in it, which I think attended that conference, but it's really the big challenge is to talk to people that don't know that much about it, to try and get that understanding across as well. So that's kind of another element to that I think we need to address. But the challenge is, and this kind of the second challenge has been, obviously our equipment this year wasn't designed for rewilding through the contract, whereas going forward it will be. So that will be able to make us be even more responsive, and so that will make a big change.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you, John. I think I want to move on now. I think this has been a really, really good discussion, actually, really helpful. I think there's a lot to think about. I think we do need, and we previously talked about a rewilding working group. I think that's effectively a parks and open spaces working group, and this is part of it. I think I would like to, I'll probably come to members outside this meeting and ask for volunteers for that group. And I think it'd be good to work with you, John. Totally get what you're saying about the logistical issues and the challenge to get to my nirvana. I think the whole process, the whole point of a conversation would be just to see, how close we could get to it. Or I'm sure you're absolutely right. There'll be perfectly legitimate reasons to push back on that, and we'll meet somewhere in between. And I think we can get to a place where hopefully we can bring the vast majority of people with us on this. Clearly, communication is absolutely key with all of this, but particularly this issue, I think, isn't it? The narrative around it, why we're doing what we're doing, and why we're not doing or not able to do what other people might want us to do. So it's I think that's been really useful. Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate it. And again, thanks for all that you're doing. I'd like to move on now to item 9 on the agenda, which is Corporate Performance Monitoring Report. Emma, thanks for waiting. So Emma, as she does, is bringing a quarterly report to us. This is the Q4 report, which includes the last 2 or 3 weeks prior to lockdown. So, but Emma, I invite you to present your report, please.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. If you don't know me, I'm Emma Diaku, and I'm the Service Lead for Business Intelligence. I'm here today to talk you through our Q4 report. So that's the end of the 2019-20 calendar year. And the data that I'm going to be sharing with you today is based on the previous corporate plan before the new one was developed. So as I'm sure you all know, how the process works is that we align our corporate performance management framework to the corporate plan. So any commitments that have been made within that are then reflected in what we measure going forward. And apologies that this Q4 data is quite late. The timings don't always perfectly align with the panel and when the reports are produced. So this is why you've got it a few months after the close of the quarter. What I'm going to do, if it's okay, I'll share my screen, and if everyone can just let me know that they can see that fine, that would be great. Let's have a look. Can everybody see that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So there's a few slides to go through with you here, and I'm happy to take questions as we go if you want to drop them into the chat or put a hands up. I won't be able to see everybody's hands up because it skews the screen a bit when you're presenting, but I'm sure Philippa will point them out for me. So as I said, it was aligned to the previous corporate plan, and I'll just a reminder there of the aims and priorities that we were measuring against. So we were looking at prosperity and opportunity and the various different priorities under that, such as driving growth in North Somerset, ensuring town centres were thriving and so on, health and well-being, which picked up around enabling residents to make healthy choices, supporting families and commissioning quality healthcare, and quality places around sustainable housing, building great places to live and visit, and empowering people to contribute to the community. So within that, we have what we call key corporate performance indicators aligned to those, and they're measures which either pull from council data or they pull from national data, and they're intended to give you a bit of an overview of how we've progressed against each of those aims and priorities. So for 2019-20, the whole year, 60% of our key performance indicators achieved or exceeded their agreed levels of performance, so the targets that we'd set at the beginning of the year, and those targets are set in consultation with heads of service, team managers for the areas of work. We had 19% of them are within tolerance, so we put them down as amber. They've not quite met the target, but they are close to it, and we had 21%, 10 that were below the agreed levels of performance. And I'm just going to take you through each of those areas in details, and again jump in with a question if there are any. So looking at the prosperity and opportunity priority, you can see there that we have quite a high number of green measures, and I've listed them all out for you there with the Q4 result and the target, so you can see how we've either achieved or exceeded the target there. So things like the net business rates payable exceeded its target, our council tax received, the claimant count, and the chair and I were discussing the claimant count a bit earlier, and I'm sure you're all raising an eyebrow because that's green, and no doubt you're all familiar with the fact that the claimant count has increased quite drastically over the last few months, but bear in mind this was the end of Q4. That has gone above 5% now, so we're keeping an eye on that. There's some measures there around the number of business startups that are supported, how many continue trading after 12 months, some measures around children that we offered places to on National Offer Day. You know, we're always top quartile performance for those measures. And some measures too around our attainment gaps. We took these particular measures to our children's and young people's scrutiny panel earlier on in the year. And we've got a bit of an extra analysis to do over those, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later. But these are basically for all of the stages, such as early years, Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, Key Stage 4. They look at the gap between the cohort of children who are eligible for free school meals and those that aren't, and what the gap is between those. So I was really pleased to see that there was a reduction in that gap for our early years children and our Key Stage 1 children across reading, writing and maths. And we also have had some employment programmes over the course of 1920, including Team North Somerset, which aims to help people who are far from the job market into employment or training, and also an Achieving Aspiration programmes, which focused on our care leavers and helping them into secure traineeships, apprenticeships or employment. And you can see that those also exceeded their targets, which we're very pleased to see. For those where we unfortunately did not exceed the target, I have some detail on those for you here. So there was two KCPIs. One was around the vacant retail premises in North Somerset across our town centre. So that's Weston, Portishead, Clevedon and Nailsea. You can see there that we were not successful in achieving our target of less than 12% vacancy, and instead came in at 14.4. I popped the numbers in there as well, just to give the context that at the beginning of the year we had 154 vacant units, and actually there were 2 more vacant at the end year, which was interesting considering we were getting to the end of the year, and as you said, pandemic was starting to kick in. And the second one there is around Key Stage 2. So this is the gap, as I was talking about earlier, between free school meal children and non-free school meal. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to reduce the gap as much for Key Stage 2. It's at 30%, where we had an end year target of 27. As I said, the Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel have asked for a bit more of analysis around that, and especially looking at those who are eligible for pupil premium as well. So that analysis is ongoing, so we can try and understand a little bit more about why that hasn't hit its target. Are there any questions for prosperity and opportunity before I go on to health and wellbeing?
There aren't any in the chat, Emma.
Lovely, thank you, Philippa. Into health and wellbeing, so we had 9 of our KCPIs have achieved their target. We continue to maintain a low level of under 18 conceptions within North Somerset. The rate of our children looked after is below the national averages. We show an increase in early help episodes, and those are interventions through things like our children's centres, our high impact families programme, things that do overall family support, a decrease in the number of children in need, a decrease in the number of children on a child protection plan, And then we had the High Impact Families Programme, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is a government mandated programme where we were given a specific target of families to engage with, provide support in things like help back to work or parenting or children's attendance. And we were given a target to achieve around that, which was achieved at the end of the year. And then we have some adult social care and safeguarding measures there around increasing our service users who receive self-directed support, of which we always score extremely highly in terms of the national overview, and ensuring that the people in permanent care home placements, be it those over 65 or those below 65, has remained fairly stable, which it did up until the end of Q4. Again, we do have some that didn't quite hit their target, and I will go into those in more detail now. We have some additional measures around our children looked after, and one of those is around reducing the number of children over the age of 10 years entering care in the quarter. That increased slightly in Q4. There's been some analysis to try and determine the reasons behind that, and it has since reduced. So that's good news. And also too, in terms of the second measure, which was a reduction in the number of children looked after overall. At the end of the quarter, we were at 237 children. That's reduced quite significantly now and is close to reaching its overall target. And we had a measure there, another measure around high impact families. And this was an interesting one because it was about how many families were on that programme and not necessarily how many you had to work with to show sustained progress. So we hadn't quite attached as many as government said we should, but the results themselves were where government said they should. So that worked out in the end. And then we have a few health measures. So we have a measure around increasing the number of 4-week smoking quitters by 25%. And we had a measure against that which said we'd like it to show a stable trend. It didn't quite show that, which is why that's red. I did read a very interesting article yesterday that said 1 million people across the country have given up smoking since the start of the pandemic. So perhaps we'll see that one come green quite shortly.
I saw that too.
Yeah. We also have a measure around health checks that we expected to be delivered. Unfortunately, we didn't quite hit target on that. My understanding is because we'd had some disappointments in terms of funding for that piece of work. And we also have a measure around increasing the number of our shared lives household, which was ever so slightly below the target. It had been steady throughout the year and we very much just missed out. I'd argued slightly that one should be amber, but my analyst tells me that it doesn't quite meet the tolerance, so it's not allowed, but it probably should be. So that I don't think that's one to worry about, and that will uptick into the new year. Any questions on health and wellbeing before we go into quality places?
No, there aren't any, Emma.
Okay. So lastly of all, for quality places, we've got some really strong results, especially from a climate emergency perspective here. So to start with, we've got something around antisocial behaviour. We've been looking at antisocial behaviour overall in North Somerset compared to the previous year, and it was on target. There was less incidents compared to 18-19. For our climate emergency, we continued to maintain our high levels of recycling, exceeded target, continued to maintain low levels of residual waste, exceeded target. And the percentage of waste that went to landfill, again, was lower than we had expected it to be. So they're all really positive results. We have a couple of highway measures here. So we have one around our road network, so the principal road network, and the government measures that by where it thinks maintenance should be considered. Lower than the previous year, down to 1.3%, and one of the best results nationally. And for our potholes, we have exceeded our target of potholes being repaired within 28 days. The target was 90%, and it was 94% achieved for that measure. We have two measures under quality places which didn't quite achieve their agreed levels of performance. And I'm going to just go to the principal road network one first and talk about households in temporary accommodation in a minute. This is a second measure that lines up with the first one. So the first one was principal roads where maintenance should be considered, and the second is non-principal. So the non-principal roads was slightly higher. It had been 4.5% in 2018-19, and we had set a target of staying fairly stable against that. But it came out at 5.8% instead, so it was slightly above what we had expected it to be. And the other measure is around the number of households in North Somerset living in temporary accommodation. So you can see through Q1, 2 and Q3, it was fairly steady against an end-year target of 60 households. We did see an increase in Q4, and that was purely related to the pandemic, where we had an extra duty to help house those that didn't have accommodation. We've been keeping an eye on that throughout the pandemic. It stayed fairly stable, so we'll see how that looks at the end of Q1. And that's all of my slides. So if there are any further questions about the detail in that, I'm happy to take it. We'll obviously be bringing a Q1 report. Q1 has closed just recently, but obviously we have a bit of time to analyse data. We will be bringing a report for that, which will have many of these measures in and a number of new measures aligned to the new corporate plan aims and priorities.
You have Councillor Codling wishing to speak now.
Thank you for that. Sarah, I'll come to you in a second. Thank you for that, Emma. I've got a couple of points, but Sarah, as you might need to leave, we'll go with you first. Would you like to ask Emma your question?
Thank you, Chairman. That's kind. Thank you, Emma, for that presentation. My question stroke comment relates to recycling specifically. I understand that North Somerset has got thinking during the COVID-19 spell, which won't be fully reflected in your figures, as you say. Our performance has been better than those of neighbouring authorities, but we are seeing time and time again there's a huge disparity between the data that comes out in a weekly format to elected members and the reality. So there's an ongoing issue with that. I'm not sure it would actually affect the high level sort of KPIs that you're dealing with here, but it still needs to be noted because there's a serious disparity there. And certainly on my patch, I can testify to that. On a Friday, we are having repeated problems. The contract performance is deteriorating.
I was muted there, apologies. So I can't speak to that. I can see Gemma still on the call, so I don't know if she wants to jump in with anything. But from a quarterly perspective, yeah, that data is analysed and reported at a quarterly. I don't have Q1 data. The quarter only just closed. So how things have changed during the pandemic, I can't say right now, but that data will be out within the next few weeks.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, my points were, just touching on, Sarah just mentioned there about the amount of waste collected during lockdown, and I think we've had some, the figures were shared with us. I think it was, went up 17% or something, didn't it? And that certainly over the first 13 weeks of lockdown. Obviously, these reports come to COCO, and then obviously the individual policy to the individual policy and scrutiny panels as well. They'll scrutinise the reports according to their remit. So we're taking like a rear view mirror look, aren't we, at Q4 of the last financial year? As I mentioned in the meeting we had just before this, I think as we go forward, it's going to be increasingly important, I think, that we get a forward view of, a sense of those areas that, what are the areas that might literally be in danger of falling over in 6 months' time or 9 months' time, that kind of thing. Equally, I think there's a lot of really good things that we're doing, good stories to tell, and I'm not sure we don't sort of produce like a annual report or anything, do we, as a corporate might? But I think, hopefully this isn't too unfair, but I think at one point, you've been doing all sorts of other things, but if we were able to convert some of the stories that lie behind this data into some data dashboards or something, I'm not sure if the data dashboard thing is a project, but keen to make a lot of this information a bit more communicable, and because I think some interesting stuff here. So there's like a rear view mirror aspect to this, which is what we're doing now, and part of that is that something, can we present that to the public in an interesting way? I know we occasionally do some pie charts and things I've seen in presentations, but I think importantly going forward we need to somehow weave into this panel particularly a forward view of some of this stuff as well. I think that would be, it's important to scrutinise that as well.
If I could just, I can see, does Gemma want to come in first with a comment on the recycling, and then I can address the issues around forward horizon scanning and what we're currently doing in terms of data analytics to make some of this data more easily engaged with by our residents?
That would be good. Gemma, do you want to?
Yeah.
Did you want to chip in? Yeah.
Sure. I was just going to reinforce what Steve said about we know that the levels of waste in all areas have risen, particularly in the last 3 to 4 months. We know particularly that cardboard has gone up by quite a large percentage, so somewhere in the region of 20%. And because it's quite bulky, it's quite a challenge to collect and dispose of it all. And some of the we rely a little bit on the price of recycling in order to subsidise the service, and some of those prices have gone down a little bit as well. So I think the next quarterly report you'll see will have that data presented in a proper way, but just anecdotally, and the tracking that we do within the contract, we know that levels of waste have gone up quite a lot, and it is quite a challenge for us. And I think Steve's point about being on the front foot and understanding what these challenges are. So we don't think this is going to change. People's behaviours have changed, and people's shopping behaviours have changed. So we know that one of the things in the work plan is we're looking at a waste minimisation strategy, because we actually have to be a lot more smart about the way we try and engage with people to act differently, because we think we're going to have waste issues if we don't, and so it's quite a challenge. So I just wanted to reinforce really what Steve had said about levels of waste going up.
Thank you, Gemma. Emma.
Yeah, just to give a little bit of information around the way that our performance management framework works. We have different levels of data that's reported at different levels of the organisation. So our scrutiny panels see the top level, which is our key corporate performance indicators. Our executive as well, key corporate performance indicators. But as you move down the organisation through corporate leadership team, our directorate leadership team, and our services, the detail and the complexity of the data becomes larger, and it's at that level where you start moving into a position where you're able to do more real-time reporting. So if I take our children's social services, for instance, that has a real-time reporting aspect where data is available for somebody to look at as is happening at that point in time. It becomes much harder when you start aggregating the data upwards to get that level of real-time performance reporting, which is why often in our corporate performance world, it does feel like we're always looking back a little bit. It's a discussion that Gemma and Lucy and I have had about how we look at some areas that are very much resident facing in terms of our waste and our potholes and all of those front facing services, to try and understand how more real time we could make that information. And we have a project at the moment which is called Power BI, which is a piece of tech. If anybody wants to look it up, it's very aesthetically pleasing. You can have little drop downs and look at things that is aiming to provide those much more real time dashboards. But even within that project, unless you're Google, the chances are that for most aggregate measures, you are always going to be looking back a little bit. When we do our service level data reporting as well, we do look at some of that horizon scanning. So we forecast forward through really simple things like linear trends or other more complex things like predictive analytics to try and see in what direction we think things are going to change. But as anybody on the call will know, horizon scanning and predictive analytics are tricky beasts and don't always tell you what necessarily then happens a few months down the line. But, we do those pieces of work for things like people projections and housing projections and projections of social care demand and so on. So that does happen. The panel perhaps isn't seeing it, but that work happens at service and the directorate levels. But I'd be happy for a conversation with the chair and vice chair to see how we might be able to build in some more of that to give an element of reassurance around some of this data and insight.
Thank you, Emma. That's great. Let's do that. I also mindful that obviously you present data, that it's the narrative around the data that gives it context too. Mark, Councillor Mark Crosby, I think you wanted to say something.
Can I suggest that we write to Amazon suggesting that we will impose a levy on them for the amount of cardboard that we are required to pick up on their behalf? Actually, I'm not being entirely flippant on that. I think if some local authorities started pointing out to Amazon and others that the volume of cardboard that they're generating is becoming a real pain, and that we feel that they have to make a contribution towards our costs of collecting it. And I don't see what's wrong that perhaps we ask, as a panel, we ask the leader if he would be willing to do such a thing.
I think this is all part of the waste minimisation strategy, because you're absolutely right. It's not always changing people's behaviours. There's a whole industry in creating waste. For me, it's supermarkets as well. It's the excessive packaging and there is influence we can have collectively. So we work together as the four authorities in this area on waste disposal. We've got a joint waste disposal contract, as I'm sure most of you are aware. So actually there is some strength that we've got by working together on this and putting some pressure. I mean, I would love to, if there's a way, just anything that we can do to discourage that additional packaging or make it difficult for those organisations to get away with that. I mean, obviously the waste, we can talk about this endlessly in our waste subgroup meetings, but the Environment Bill has got some proposals about some measures to take about packaging, about return deposit schemes and all sorts of stuff. It's been paused, like a lot of things, but it might have some good stuff in there.
I think organisations, particularly like Amazon, are very, very sensitive at present, particularly about their contribution back to the communities that they serve. And I think that any effort, for example, I remember in Canada a similar issue where the city of Edmonton collected all the cardboard from Amazon and others over a week, stacked it up, and said, and took a photograph basically in an interview with their leader saying, do you want it back? Because unless you help us, we will bring it back to your premises.
I'd love to do it. It's only down the road as well, isn't it?
Let's just do it. Simple.
Thank you, Mark. I really, point very well made. I could say the same for Lucozade as well. The amount of Lucozade bottles that I pick out the Reens around in Yatton is just extraordinary. Half the bottles are Lucozade. Anyway, Jill, it's you. We've got a few people. People have lapsed into using the raising their hand and not using the chat, so it's a little bit difficult to follow. I'm slightly mindful of the time too, but I've got Stuart and John, and I think Peter. Peter, I think you're probably first. Did you want to say something? Or was your hand still up from previously?
Yeah, the reason it's hand is because chat's not working. So I'm almost there, but no chat. No, I agree with that. I think if you look over the last few weeks where obviously packaging has grown, which is disappointing, but I listen to people, because I no longer work for Morrison's, but I do hear the people that work there telling me, and more people, the people that used to buy their bananas, for example, just loose, are now buying them in packaging. And their reason is when they get home, all they have to do is wipe the packaging rather than each banana. And there's a number of things like that at the moment where there is more packaging, but also picking up Mark's point, it's not only Amazon, there's now companies. We've had a delivery the other day for a garden ornament, and it came with packaging inside which said this is not recyclable. And you just think, where are these people living? What, on a different planet? Because we're moving the right way, but I just hope those people that are purchasing now their groceries and actually going for packaging rather than non-packaging, hopefully when things get back to reasonable normality, they will go back to the way they were doing it before. And then the supermarket can gradually withdraw it. Because like everything else, if you don't put it there as an option, people just don't do it. They won't buy it. So you have to have it there, but gradually wean people off needing packaging. But I think at the moment it's more of a problem.
I think you're right, Peter. I do feel as if we've gone back a step, actually, over the last few months. Thank you for that point. Stuart, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just a brief point. I violently agree with everything Mark has said. I think it's a really good idea. I think we should do it. I also wonder whether some of the general education around cardboard usage and up to waste and the stuff we discussed, as Gemma said, in the waste group, could be put out to the community and just to remind them of some of the impacts of COVID and how, when there are strains on the recycling system, that maybe there are changes that they can make in their consumer behaviour that might help us with a sort of joint challenge sort of approach. That was it.
Thank you, Vice Chair. John Cato.
And yes, basically, I wanted to completely support all of that. I just want to make sure that it was, properly out there. We should be really doing something about it. And what can you say? It's obvious, really, isn't it? Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we want to be a campaigning council. Well, we
absolutely need to be on this one, actually.
Where we can influence things. Yeah, excellent. Emma, thank you. We went off at a bit of a tangent there, but it was really good stuff. Thank you very much for bringing your report. Let's have a separate conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, item 10. So we're getting there, almost there. Panel's work plan. Philippa, do you want to begin by speaking to the work plan? And I'm sure I'll chip in, and others.
Yes, well, there's obviously an awful lot going on with the work plan at the moment. So, yes, so the work plan you've got in front of you now is actually the one that was updated following the March meeting. So clearly an awful lot has happened between now and then. So I've put it on and published as it was agreed in March, but we've got a lot of work to do on it. We've actually been, the forward view conversation you've just been having, we've actually been looking at the format of the forward plan and how it doesn't really reflect truly all of the work that the panel members are doing outside of panel meetings. And it also doesn't give enough of a sort of forward guidance and forward steer. So my team have been working very hard on looking at devising a new work plan, which I think is starting to be shared with chairman now. So hopefully it will reflect truly the work that's going on, the intended work that's going to be done, the desired work that could be done if there was the capacity to do so. So yeah, that's being shared with chairman at the moment, and then when it's in a position to, then obviously we can start to use it and use it more widely. So that's just a bit about the format of the work plan itself. Going through each of the groups on there, obviously we've talked a lot about waste today. So suffice to say, the steering group did give endorsement for the idea of introducing an enforcement company, which obviously Gemma spoke about earlier, agreeing with certainly the principle of doing so. And then the next meeting, we're going to look at considering the green waste implementation, as Gemma has already said. Community safety has been focusing very much on the PSPO review at the moment, which again we've already talked about today. So that's been the focus for now, but I think it's also timely to have another bit of a catch up with the community safety team about any other areas that are pressing for them at the moment. ICT, you will see I've sent an email round to all of you. Obviously, we're doing an awful lot more with our IT at the moment, and virtual meetings in particular. But we're increasingly reliant on our IT. So I've sent an email out to all of you just saying any particular issues and problems that you have, if you could let me know. And we've got a meeting taking place the week after next to start looking at those matters. Finance report, you would normally have a finance report to your meetings. The only reason we haven't got it today is it just hasn't been timely for the finance team, and as you can appreciate, there's an awful lot of work being done at the moment around finance, so it's intentional that it's not on this meeting. Another couple of matters that we'd picked up on under item 4, page 4. The Winter Gardens annual report would have come to this meeting, but again, with current circumstances, a lot of things have been slightly derailed. So the Winter Gardens annual report will come to the November meeting. Also, the Sky Lantern policy review, which the panel agreed to look at after a year. So again, that's looking much more likely to be November. And again, I've mentioned the finance report. So then we are on to the programme of the Your Neighbourhood work, which is obviously going to take up a great deal of work for the panel. So obviously discussion today, what I'm picking up is that we've agreed to undertake a sort of leisure task and finish working group and that will look at the leisure strategy and recovery of the main leisure centres. So I can follow that one up with an email about membership and start arranging meetings for that. Library strategy, again, Gemma talked about that one, and that's looking at the service rather than the locations, and all of these tie in very nicely to the sort of inquiry day we were talking about, and that activity of work that's going to take place. Likewise, parks and open spaces, again, we can look at a task and finish working group, but it also ties into that work with the community that we want to do with the sort of inquiry day style sessions. I've also picked up on the discussion you've just had with Emma about reporting and how we can review that, and then also the conversation we've just had now about waste minimisation and what we could do as a council to try and have a voice about that. So I think that's all I have to say on that, but any questions?
Can I just add a few things to that? For the first, thank you very much for that. Yeah, in terms of finance, you're absolutely right. It would absolutely stacked, aren't they, the finance team?
Yeah.
But Scrutiny chairs, we have received a briefing from Richard Pensker relatively recently. In terms of the inquiry day that we've spoken of, in probably fairly vague terms, this basically, I think, is a really big but quite exciting piece of work potentially. So I've had separate conversations with Richard Blows, who's been leading the work in terms of the interface with the council's interface with the community groups, the community response, the different local networks. I've spoken to Matt Lenny, Director of Public Health. I've had a conversation with Mark Crosby, particularly in his role as chair of ASH, which for those listening in on YouTube is Adult Services and Housing. Is that right, Mark? Yeah, Adult Services and Housing Policy and Scrutiny Panel.
Adult Social Care and Housing.
Adult Social Care. So, Mark, I know that you're holding an informal session for your panel, looking at some of these big things coming up, responding to COVID. Also, a really interesting angle of looking at how to make the most of the skills of elected members as well. I think we can probably do something similar. So I want to speak to you again about this. So I think we can weave the library's strategy into this as well. So there are also different strands to this. So I think this is probably best done as an inquiry day or inquiry days. I think it's probably going to have to be October. It seems quite a long way off, but I think it needs to be a lot of work needs to go into the preparation of it. And I can foresee different sessions, perhaps chaired by, session chaired by me, session chaired by you, Mark, chaired by other sessions chaired by others, according to the different emphases of the sessions within the inquiry day. I need to put some flesh on the bones of this, and I'll share that with colleagues in due course. But this is effectively a big piece of work, looking at how we can best look at the opportunities arising from building on the community, the way our communities have responded to the pandemic. I think I'll leave it at that for now, but I'll speak to as many of you as I can separately about this. But I think it's a big chunky piece of work. Philippa mentioned the ICT steering group. We've really wanted to meet and discuss some of the issues that members have been having, and as Philippa was saying, we've got some things set up, I think, more or less fixed for the 28th of July. I know that some members have been having some particular problems, but I think at any rate it would be a good time to review how we've been using these different platforms, how we intend to use them going forward for panel meetings, but all sorts of other hybrid meetings as well, and what the requirements might be going forward. So I think that's timely, so we definitely will want to do that. Very, very quickly, CCTV. is something which we've again covered in the panel, this panel, and in the the end of the previous administration too, is something that they were very keen on too. I'm pleased to report that the upgrade work has now started on upgrading the our CCTV kit. I think that started very short time ago and will be complete hopefully sometime in September. And we can report. I'll probably share something with panel members separately on some of the detail around that rather than talking to it now. But that's going ahead, so that's really good news. And also we also talked about a waste and planning task and finish group, which is something which will also go on the work plan. We haven't forgotten about it, just that we've been focusing on other matters, obviously to do with waste. I think that's probably all I wanted to say. There's a lot going on, and we'll be coming to you, panel members, with your input on a lot of this. It's always really appreciated. I know where everyone is just incredibly busy, members and officers, but I think we've got some forward momentum on most things. Probably the only thing there isn't forward momentum is the culture and heritage strategy, because Richard Blows has been completely sidetracked with the community response. But that was a 10-year strategy anyway. So that can probably be, we can afford to park that for a few months, but we won't lose it. We'll come back to it. Any immediate response from panel members to what I've said? Sorry, there was a lot there.
Yeah, Councillor Crewe.
Peter.
Thank you. Picking up on the point that Philippa made about community safety, yes, we do need to look at CCTV. What we've achieved in the CCTV system this time, which Weston led the other 4 towns, and I actually made the proposal of the system we went with. The advantage is it gives us the option of having mobile cameras and also changing to 180-degree cameras. And they work a slightly different way. The point of all that is it could now be a great assistance in some of the other things we're looking at in terms of litter, where we can spot people doing these things. So in actual fact, we do need to discuss that, because at the moment, the 4 town councils have the agreements to go into and sign up. I think Weston will be done in the next couple of days. But then there are certain commitments which the town councils have asked for that we need then to review to make sure North Somerset can actually deliver on that. So that's an important one. The Chinese lanterns, I understand 2 of the outlets that used to sell them are not going to sell them anymore. So that will help towards that. And yes, this winter will be a good time to look at that again. But the other one, Chairman, which occurs to me, a few years ago, where we had to make some major savings, obviously it's never easy, but you always look at the big stuff to see how you can save money by taking 100,000 out here, 100,000 there. We formed a small working group then that looked at the small spends, where we buy stationery and things like that. It sounded very low key, but over a period of 4 years, we saved £3 million. Which, if you look, I know we've got a huge budget, but £3 million nonetheless in the current situation could be different. So it's something to think of, that rather than have a big group, a small working group looking at things like that, get some reports from officers where we do things, hire cars, all the stuff we hire in, all the things we do, is there a better way of doing it? Sometimes we do jobs outside the town council. At Weston, we've now looked at that. We're bringing some in-house, because time has moved on. It's actually cheaper to deliver in-house than it is to go to a contractor. It's things like that that it's worth, I think, pursuing.
Definitely.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm pretty sure actually that I know directors have been looking at, and their teams have been looking at areas where we could make savings. and I'm sure they're also covering the really, the minutiae as well, because as you say, it all adds up. And I'd much prefer that kind of approach to, a salami slicing approach where we just shave a little bit off every single budget, which I don't think works. Thank you very much for that. I don't see any more comments, so I'd like to move on, please. Item 11, urgent business. Any other urgent business? I don't think we have any.
I haven't been notified.
Thank you for the put. So at 4:18, I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions. I think we've had some really good discussions, actually. Thank you for your time, and I declare the meeting closed.